Namaskar, Narada Muniji.
I'm talking here with Dada Jyotirupananda. So, Dada, how did you get involved with Ananda Marga? What brought you here?
When I was very young, I had a couple of what I might call intimations that there was something more that I would do. I was young. I remember once, a couple times, I would be a young boy, and in the turmoil and agony that young boys and girls have about life, and I would be sitting there or laying there on a bed, and I would hear a voice that was not a voice I'd ever heard before. And this voice would say, "Don't worry, it will end soon," something like that. And that gave me some reassurance. Another intimation I had that, as I said, something would be different is that when I was young, I used to read science fiction among many other books. And at one point, I was feeling, I've got to touch the sky. I've got to get to the sky. How will I ever get there? And of course, many years later, I read what Baba said, that in the living being, there's a thirst for limitlessness. But at that young age, well, all I knew, I knew nothing about Ananda Marga, of course, but all I knew was there's something more out there. And so when I eventually got to university and met many people, and in my second year at uni, I looked up a friend of mine from the first year, and something was different about him, about the room he was staying in. I couldn't quite touch it. But then he told me that over the summer he had learned something called yoga. And he might have been speaking Sanskrit to me. In fact, he was speaking Sanskrit. But the point is, the word yoga meant zero to me. But as I said, there was some feeling I had that felt good. And so I asked him about it. He'd learned meditation from the father of a friend of his, and he'd had some insights. And this intrigued me because it was different than my normal life of get good grades, get a good job, get married, and just live a normal life, which had never felt quite right to me. So talking to Kaler, my friend, I learned about consciousness levels, about how there's more ways to perceive the world rather than just what you read in a book. And I remember maybe that first time I was with him talking about yoga, he talked about meditation, but then he also told me he showed me how to do a headstand, which I could not possibly do, but he did it well. Then he showed me how to sit in full lotus. I'd never heard of a headstand. I'd never heard of full lotus, but I could sit in full lotus perfectly. And later I realized that maybe this was a hint that I was never going to be a great yogi, but maybe I would be a sadhaka, a meditator. Time went on, and I went to various lectures about meditation. I read books about meditation. I talked to Kaler and other people, but somehow I couldn't do it. And one incident will summarize all of this. I tell this in my classes, is that I'd heard about a candle exercise where you sit in a dark, quiet room, light a candle, and then over minute after minute after minute, you start realizing things about your consciousness, about past lives, things like that. So I was sharing a room with one guy. He was out for the evening. I locked the door, turned off the light. I lit the candle, and I waited about that long, less than 10 seconds. I could not concentrate for even 10 seconds on this candle. I blew out the candle, got out, unlocked the door, went out looking for friends, looking for something to do. And the message even then I realized was, I want to do meditation, but I'm not ready. I understood I understood in those days even that a teacher was necessary. And the candle exercise clarified to me that I need a teacher, not just a book or a candle. In those days in my town, I lived in a college town called Bloomington, Indiana, about maybe 100,000 people or less. It was small. And the only meditation around in those days was transcendental meditation, what we call TM. And I was resisting it because it seemed too easy, and it was a bit materialistic with the money you have to pay. But gradually I started leaning a little bit toward it because I needed some meditation. And one day I was sitting with a friend of mine in the university cafeteria, and my mind was whirling away as it usually did, 1,000 thoughts a minute and all. And he said, there's a meditation course starting this week. And if you take it, you'll have all summer, because summer is coming up, you'll have all summer just to practice the meditation. And if he had said that to me a month earlier or a week earlier, I would have just ignored it. But somehow he caught me at the right moment. And I took the course. And I remember walking home after the first lecture before you take initiation, and I realized in my mind, I thought, I'm going to start meditation and I'll do it for the rest of my life. Now, there was nothing rational, no rational reason for me to say that. I'd never done meditation. I'd never stuck to anything difficult at all. But somehow I knew I'm going to do meditation the rest of my life. So eventually I got the initiation from the TM teacher, and I started twice a day with the meditation. And it was great. It relaxed me. It helped me to just focus my mind in one place. I had never been able to do either one of those things, relax or focus my mind. So I felt this TM is a good start. But from all my reading, I understood that it's not going to get me forever to the best place. Gradually, uh, I started meeting people from many different yoga groups, and there was one group with a funny name called Ananda Marga. And I met one person here, one person there, and it seemed nice. They had a poster for their advertising their classes, and the poster said, meditation should be as free as the light in the air. This was certainly different than transcendental meditation, and the people were nice. But, there were so many things to do in life, I didn't think much about it. Then one day I'd heard about a lecture that Ram Dass was giving in another town, about 3 or 4 hour drive from where I lived. And I had seen Ram Dass a couple of years earlier, and his talk had changed my life really, because I realized that there are things beyond materialism. There are things beyond drugs and alcohol and enjoyment that can help you to stay high for a long time. Of course, meditation was what the key was, but I had never gone there yet until I learned TM. Then I went to this talk that Ram Dass gave in this other town, and I hitched a ride kind of with 3 friends of mine, a guy named Chuck and 2 of his friends. And they were all involved with Ananda Marga, this thing I'd heard about. And I found out that the lecture that Ram Dass was giving was a benefit talk for Ananda Marga. Ananda Marga was in a town called Carbondale, Illinois, which was as small as my town. And I found out that Ananda Marga was doing some social service in this town. They had a halfway home for women getting out of prison. They were also teaching meditation in the local maximum security prison, and they were doing other work. And it struck me that you do meditation, but you can also help the society. Because one of my clashes with meditation then was that everyone I knew doing meditation was just doing meditation, no involvement really with the society, except a job that you might have to have. And here, this Ananda Marga, they were actually helping people, and they weren't getting a reward for it. They were just helping people. So something stuck in my mind. So that evening, we went to the Ananda Marga Meditation Center before going to the talk by Ram Dass, and there were a lot of people there. We did some strange thing called Kiirtana with your hands above your head and some strange mantra. And we did our meditation, and it felt nice with these people. And after the meditation, as you know, with any Dharma chakra, there's announcements. So what was the announcement that night? The announcement was by one young woman. I still remember more or less what she looked like. The announcement was, Baba has been poisoned in jail, and now he's starting a protest fast. So that was my introduction to Ananda Marga, that the guru was in jail in India, and he'd just been poisoned. I think I shouldn't talk for other people, but I think many people would run away if that was their first introduction to Ananda Marga. But for me, it was, this guy is different. I didn't even know his name at that time. 1973. So we can find when he started the protest fast. I think it was April, or was it February? I really can't remember when he started the protest fast. But that was my first introduction to Ananda Marga. So I went back to my hometown the next day, and I met 1 or 2 margiis here and there, people I'd met at the talk who had come with us or others. And one thing that attracted me to Ananda Marga was that they were not pressing me. Whenever I'd meet people from other yoga groups, they may tend to have kind of a smile pasted on their face, meaning, we want you to come. But the margiis were just friendly people. They weren't trying to buy me or sell me anything. And this attracted me more to them. And finally, after it seemed like ages, it wasn't so long, one of their acharyas, one of their Dadas, came to our town. He gave a talk on meditation at the public library. And the next day I went to meet him at a health food store where Ananda Marga were the owners. And I asked him if I could learn meditation. And we set an appointment for 2 or 3 days in the future. And meanwhile, he didn't know that I was doing TM at the time. But in the meanwhile, he wrote down, he said, you can use this mantra, Bhavanam Kevalam, to meditate on until we have our meeting. And so twice a day for the next 2 or 3 days, I sat and did my TM, and then I did Bhavanam Kevalam. And when I did the Bhavanam Kevalam meditation for 10 minutes, maybe not long, I was feeling really high, really a very good feeling inside of me. And I thought, this is not even the personal meditation, and already I'm feeling wonderful. And so combined with that feeling and the fact that Ananda Marga they were serious people, and the fact that they worked for the society, as I said, they did the social service in many places. I thought, I want to do this. So I met with Dada Jitendra. He was a Dada originally from Maharlika, now a young Dada working in the States. And he initiated me, and I didn't feel any light enlightenment or any, any bliss of any sort, but I felt substantial. I don't know a better word to use. This felt real. That's the best way I can put it, without any rainbows or bliss of any sort. And I started going to the Dharma chakras they had, and this was an interesting introduction to how Ananda Marga always is, because I started going to the Dharma chakra twice a week. I think it was Wednesdays and Sundays in the small house that they rented. And I did that for a few weeks, and then somehow I got tired of it, and other things came into my life. I was hardly a margi, so it didn't matter to me that I missed the Dharma chakra. But after a week or two of missing the Dharma chakra, I felt this real feeling, I've got to go. And so I whizzed on my bicycle down to the Jagrati, and I knocked on the door, and some man answered. And I said, is there Dharma chakra tonight? And he didn't know what I was talking about. Pardon me. Turns out the margis had moved. And the next day I went to the health food store and found out their new address. There was no email in those days, and they hardly knew me, so no one had bothered to contact me. But that was my first experience with the movability of Ananda Marga. Jagratis, people always moving, never predictable. So I kept up with my meditation twice a day. Gradually, I learned asanas. Gradually, I learned about tandava and sentient diet, fasting, as we all do. And for me, I was glad that it was gradual, because if it had been all in one moment, I think it wouldn't have been very helpful for me. I wouldn't have been, very interested in having all these things pressed on me. Then, after doing the meditation regularly for a year and a half, I guess, in different places that I lived, I came back to my town of Bloomington, and the next thing I knew, I was unit secretary. Many years later, I realized that actually probably no one else wanted to be unit secretary. So I was gifted with that, but it was a great experience for me. I went to local meetings, what we call RDS in our region in the Midwest USA, and I met different Dadas and LFTs, a brand new term for me. What's an LFT? But I found all these people, they had a certain centeredness, a certain I want to say gravity, but I don't mean heavy. They really were focused on what they were doing, and this attracted me. By that time, I was working in our health food store and having some good experiences with meditation and meeting different Dadas and margis. And at one point, I went to, I think, my second sectoral retreat, the second time I'd gone there. And it was a big retreat, several hundred people in a rented premises in the middle of the country. And at the end, I realized I want to take my meditation further. And Ananda Marga, even non-verbally, I was realizing that it was really becoming part of my life, not just something I do. And so I volunteered to become an LFT. They'd been asking for it or talking about LFTs at the retreat, of course. And so I went to Denver, where the sectorial office was, a big building, and became an LFT. Nothing dramatic about it. My first work my first posting was editing the sectorial newsletter called the Crimson Dawn, which is still going today, I guess. And I also was involved with other local activities, helping with the food co-op that the Margies had, Rawa evenings that they put on. And I was getting more lessons and, of course, eager to learn more about the meditation. And finally, one thing happened, just among various other things, and it was time for 6 lessons. So I approached Dada Danavira. Now his name is, of course, Dada Dineshananda. And then we set up an appointment on the next day, which was a Sunday, the end of October, as I remember, in 1977. He was fairly new to the region, to the sector. And I had no idea what Dhyan was. I had no idea what 6th lesson was. I had zero conception of what I would be doing. And Dada explained some things to me, reviewed some of my lessons, and then started explaining the process of Dhyan and showed me a certain photo, which you well know. And from that moment, I was in, to call it bliss would be an understatement. Everything, Baba's photo, everything was vibrating. The whole room was vibrating. The whole universe was vibrating. I was picturing the universe in a way that I could never have imagined, which I can't really describe today. And it was just more than heavenly. It was just the most powerful experience I've ever had. And the lesson finished, but this experience went on for 2 weeks, almost nonstop. Every time I did meditation, just this incredible bliss. I was completely disoriented from my work, from everything around me. Actually, I would be, for example, I'd be at a photocopy machine, and I'd wonder, what am I doing here? Or I'd be walking to meet someone. What am I doing? Not in a rhetorical sense, but I just didn't quite know why I was there, because I was in such a state of bliss, as you can say. And finally, after 2 weeks, I remember it was 2 weeks, I was with Dada Danavira in the kitchen, and he knew what state I was going through. He knew what my state of mind was for those last 2 weeks. And he said something I'll never forget, although I wish I hadn't heard it. He said, this is not going to go on forever. And right at that very moment that he said those words, I felt myself descending, as if I was in a spiritual elevator going downwards. And I became, as we say, normal. And it was, as I say, disappointing, but the good things have to end sometimes, and you have to get on with your life. But those 2 weeks were just pure ecstasy of Baba. But as far as experiences, I do want to go back a little bit. Something I forgot now that I'm thinking about Dhyan, is when I was a new Margi, I moved to San Francisco, and I expected the New Age capital of the world. There would be millions of Margis, so to speak, and there was one Margi in the city. So I didn't have much satsang for that year that I lived in San Francisco, except some Dharma chakras in another city. But I hooked up with a Zen teacher, a man from India. And I went to his classes, and I learned there was no Ananda Marga, as I said, and I was very new in the spiritual path anyway. So I thought his classes would be beneficial. And at that time, I was working in a bank in a very dry building, processing all the income and outgo of the bank. And it was dry is hardly the word for it. If I could think of a drier word than dry, I would come up with it. But one evening, I went to Shailesh's class as usual, and I was walking up the steps toward his room, toward his apartment, and I happened to look in the window, and I saw him just sitting there. And of course, I did meditation twice a day, but the rest of the time, my mind was going everywhere as usual. And I was amazed. This man can just be quiet. He's not reading a book. He's not watching television. He's not sipping tea. He's just quiet. Anyway, we had the class, and the next day, I went to work at this very dry processing center for the bank. And in the morning, I was walking around as I do. I was just a little more than an office boy, but not much more. And I started thinking about what had happened the night before. Shailesh can just be settled, calm, without any need for outside stimuli, and something clicked inside of me. I don't know what exactly happened or why it happened, but all of a sudden I could see my body inside. I could see all the cells, all the blood cells, everything just moving inside my body. I could see that each cell in my body had its own consciousness. I could, as you might see children playing in a playground or in a park, I could see, and they don't see you because you're the adult sitting off to the side, and they're just playing as they want. I could see every blood cell, every bone cell, every cell in my body was moving, was active, was having a purpose. The blood cells and the other cells, they did not know that their purpose was to keep me alive and to keep me moving and all that. But they were all working at their own purpose and very conscious of what they were doing within their own limited consciousness. And this was quite amazing. Seeing every cell in my body doing its work, moving, having its own limited consciousness, but being part of me. And then I started realizing all of these cells, they are together in one role. They have one purpose, although they individually did not know what their purpose was, as I just said. And then I started thinking in my mind, all of these cells in my body have their own purpose. And then somehow, I can't remember the words exactly, I realized that it must be the same in the whole universe. And then in that moment, my mind jumped out to the universe. And I could see everything in the universe was moving with purpose. Maybe not conscious of the purpose of the other parts of the universe, but every cell, every being, everything in the universe was moving in, I might say, coherence with a purpose toward a certain goal. I could not understand what that goal was. I could give soundbite lingo like bliss or ideation or whatever you might want to say, but everything in the universe I see had its own one purpose. Each thing in the universe, each cell, or what we now call microvita, had its own purpose, but it was all going toward one great purpose. And I realized that those cells, those beings in the universe, don't know their purpose. And it was logical for me to understand that I have a greater purpose also. Dada Narada Muni has a greater purpose also. But we don't know what it is really. Through our ideation, through our ideology, we do understand that the purpose of everything is to find bliss. But we're busy with our own lives. Just like every being, every cell in the universe that I experienced was busy with its own life, but not knowing the greater purpose. So this was rather an eye-opening experience, as you might understand. It went on for perhaps a couple of hours as I was walking around in this very dry building with bookkeepers on one side of me and data processors on another side and computer programmers over here and secretaries over there. And by Baba's grace, they weren't bothering me. I could just I was just able to have this experience, and it's odd to have this, to me, incredibly cosmic consciousness experience in the middle of bureaucratic USA. But that was something that really, it was remarkable. Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm sure I'm missing some details now. Maybe I can find what I wrote and send that to you sometime. But it was a remarkable experience, and I guess we might say it's Baba's Leela that instead of sitting in a nice park or a nice ashram or my quiet room, where I could just completely go ecstatic, I was having this, what I call cosmic experience, literally in the middle of a bank. So there's some message there which I probably don't understand even today. When I was in Seattle, I was a Prout LFT in Seattle after being a Eros LFT in Denver. And there were no acharyas in Prout at that time in USA, but we got on quite well. And there was one other LFT there named Sarveshwar. Now his name is Acharya Mahapragyananda. He was an excellent kirtan player. And he also met people. So one time he met three women who were in some sort of new age group, consciousness and vibrations and all that. And we didn't think much of it, but they were nice people. And they would come over to the Jagrati sometimes. And one time, Sarveshwar and I were doing kirtan before noon sadhana. And one of these ladies, they were probably in their 20s or 30s, I guess. I don't know how old they were. One of them, she was in the room watching us as we did our kirtan and then meditation. And with Sarveshwar, it was always great kirtan. He was a good kirtan player, as you know, is not just technically good, but there's something here, something in the heart which cannot be measured. And that's, to me, what makes a good kirtan player. And so we were doing our great kirtan with Sarvashar, then our meditation. And later in the afternoon, I talked to this woman, we were talking, and she said, when you and your friend were doing your kirtan, I saw Krishna sitting up in a corner of the room, smiling down at you. And, um, at that time, nowadays we know, at that time, I don't think I was aware that we understand Baba is in the lineage of Shiva and Krishna. And she would not have known the form of Sri Ananda Murti. But in some way, as a spiritual person, she would have had some idea of the form of Krishna, the appearance of Krishna. So that was a nice confirmation that our kirtan is not just something we do to feel good for meditation, but that Baba is watching us and gracing us when we do kirtan, or when we do anything actually. But that was quite a nice experience. Sometime later, of course, I was still living in Seattle, but not in LFT. We heard that Baba was coming to Europe. I had never seen Baba during his jail years when I was a young margi. I didn't have the motivation to go. And my only experience personally with Baba was Dhyan, which was, of course, a very personal experience. But now Baba is coming to Europe. Europe is not so far from USA, and it's quite accessible. So eventually I bought a ticket, of course, got there, and we were in Fieschi, and the first night I arrived with others, and then we settled in, and the next morning there was going to be darshan, and we were all, a lot of us, hundreds of us, in this big hall, this big room, and waiting for Baba to come. Someone was probably playing bhajans or perhaps kirtan, and then we hear Param Pita Baba Ki and look over, and Baba's coming in, and I'm so excited that Baba is coming for the first time in real life. I'm going to see Ananda Murti, my guru. And I saw a good-looking, young, older, middle-aged Indian gentleman dressed in a dhoti and nice clothing, bald-headed with a cane, and people escorting him. And it was just another person. I didn't get that ecstatic feeling that I had hoped and prayed that I would get. So, of course, that is a bit of a downer. But I realized that that's just who I am. Someone of a different mindset would have seen, Taraka Brahma in that form. But for me, my mindset saw an Indian gentleman who I knew to be my guru. But it was, as I say, it was a bit of a downer that I didn't get that ecstatic feeling that I had hoped to get. There were, of course, hundreds of margis there, and I was one of less than a handful of margis from USA. So we didn't really have connection with the acharyas in Berlin sector who could get us access to Baba for personal contact, because PC, personal contact, that's what everyone wanted when you're seeing Baba for the first time. I thought I had one card up my sleeve, because just before I had left USA, I met with Dada Mahavirananda, who is the new chief secretary of Prout for New York sector. And he wrote me a note to Dada Ramananda, Baba's personal assistant, saying, please can you manage to get PC for, my name was Jaya Krishna at that time. So he wrote a note saying, please can you have help Jaya Krishna to get personal contact with Baba. So after 2 or 3 days, I managed to find a time when I could see Dada Ramananda alone. He was standing outside in front of Baba's house, and I approached him, and he didn't know me at all, but he knew I was a margi, of course. But maybe subconsciously, he took a stand like a bodyguard, because basically a main role of a PA is to protect Baba, not to physically protect him, but to protect him from busyness and disturbances and distractions like that. So he had that, I think it was a subconscious way he was standing like this. But I went up to him and said my name, Jai Krishna, I'm from New York sector. And I said, I'd like to give you a note from Dada Mahavirananda. And I thought he'd read the note, and he knew Dada Mahavirananda very well, I'm sure. And he would have immediately made a time for me to have PC. That was my dream. Eventually, what he did, he took the note from me, said, thank you, put it in his pocket. But the way he put it in his pocket, I felt this letter from Dada Mahavirananda is going so deep into his pocket that it will never see the light of day again. Which in a way was true, because I didn't get personal contact at Fieschi. There were just too many local margis from Europe that were ahead of me in line to get PC. Fiesh ended. Baba, of course, gave many wonderful darshans. We did tandava and kaushiki many times in front of him. He went on many field walks, which, because, as I said, I was a margi from another sector with no contacts in Europe. I wasn't on any of the field walks in Fiesh with Baba, and it ended with no other dramatic experiences that I had. Then at that point, though, I decided Baba's going throughout Europe. I more or less had an idea of his program, his touring. So I said, let me go with him. And I ended up going to Eckenrath, which was the next stop in Germany, a small village. Some margies had rented a big house there where they were living, and they gave the house over to Baba for the few days he stayed in Eckenrath. And from there, my experiences started with Baba. I realized then that if I wanted to be busy doing something useful and getting close to Baba, that the best thing I could do was to sign up to be a VSS guard. And so I approached Dada Dharma Vedananda, who was the chief secretary of VSS in Berlin sector. And I signed up to be a VSS guard. And here I had my first, you might say, unusual experience with Baba. At one point, I was doing my VSS guard duty at the foot of the steps where Baba would go upstairs to his room. And Baba was walking with Dada Ramananda, his PA, and came up to me as he was going upstairs. And he said something to me. I can't remember now what he was. And Baba's talking to me. And I was silent. What could I say to Baba? He just made some casual remark to me, but I was just in shock that Baba is actually talking to me directly. And I said nothing. Then after a moment, Baba looked to Dada Ramananda and said, "Oh, the boy is very silent now." And they kind of smiled to each other. And then Baba walked upstairs. And of course, I mentally bit my tongue because there were so many things I could have said to Baba in a respectful, loving way. But I was just in shock that my guru was actually there talking to me with no one else around. So I was just completely silent. And that was my first personal experience with Baba. But it did change soon. In Eckenrath, finally, I had the chance to get personal contact. I went upstairs to Baba to talk to Dada Ramananda. Dada Ramananda will take your name, and always people who aren't margis may not realize that Ananda Marga is very organizational, not just New Age, do what you want. So Dada Ramananda knew I was a proud Avt, and he gave me a goal of making so many proutists in the next 3 months. Later, I calculated that I would have to make like one proudist per hour or something ridiculous like that to fulfill his target. But of course, I didn't calculate. Then I just said, yes, Dada, yes, Dada. So then I maybe signed something, I don't know. Then I went to Baba's room. I started knocking on the door, and Ramananda just go in, And now I realize it would be a little silly to knock on Baba's door. So I went in, I did Sastang Pranam. Baba was sitting on his cot, which when I was sitting down on the floor, my head was probably around his knee level, something like that. And Baba asked, I think he always does, he asked my name, my posting, where I live, things like that. And I answered him, and then he started talking a bit, and just general spiritual things. I can't recall much of what it was. But then the mood changed, and Baba started asking me a series of questions, which I call rhetorical questions, because clearly the only answer I should say is yes, or yes, Baba. Baba was sitting, and he was his right arm, he was gesticulating, moving it in an animated way. And he might ask me questions like, is Ananda Marga here to serve the world? And is meditation an important part of your life? Things like that. Not those questions exactly, but several questions like that Baba asked. And I would, of course, say, yes, Baba, every time. Yes, Baba. Finally, he asked me one question. And he asked me, now, my son, you do your work for the good of humanity, don't you? And something clicked in my mind. It wasn't verbal. It wasn't logical. It wasn't rational. Just something changed in my mind. And I'll repeat the question so I can go on with it. Baba said, now, my son, you do your work for the good of humanity, don't you? And I said, no, Baba, I do my work for you. And then Baba put his hand down. He looked straight at me, completely right in my eyes. He was very quiet. It was as if he was seeing me for the first time, which of course we know cosmically Baba knows us from the beginning. But it was as if he was seeing me for the first time. And he just looked at me and looked at me. I like to think it was a minute he was doing this, but it was probably less than a minute. But his eyes were just completely looking at me. I don't even think he was blinking. And then he started talking again with a quiet mood. I can't honestly remember what he said, but for a short time he was talking about, I guess, spiritual things, perhaps organizational things. And then we came to an end. So he gave me a blessing. He put his hands on my head, and he would have said something in Sanskrit, which I would not have known. And then he said in English, he said, "You will do many great things for the entire universe," which I thought was a pretty good blessing. Then I ended with the Sastan Pranam and Namaskar and went out of the room. And the custom was you left his room toward another room where you would do some meditation for a short time, just to absorb the experience of being with Baba. And that was my first PC with Baba. Later, we can get to another PC many years later. After Ekenrot, we were in a couple of different places. It was beautiful, and I think about that often. And I quite honestly say, I'm not being humble when I say this, but I honestly wonder when I will start doing those great things for the entire universe. But we probably all have many lifetimes ahead of us, according to Baba's wishes and according to our sanskaras. So maybe I'll start doing some great things sometime. But after Ekenrot, Baba was in Timurn, which, as I later realized, was the only place in Europe that Baba went to that we actually owned. And perhaps that's why the vibration there was exceptional. I don't think I've ever been to a darshan, a DMC with Baba, where you had such a high vibration of joy, intensity, wonderful kirtan, deep meditation, etc. And he made, as I'm sure you know, that was the only place outside of India where Baba created Avadhuts, two Avadhuts there. And again, I assume it was because it was our property. He could have done it anywhere in Europe if he had wished to, but he, of course, wanted to do it on Ananda Marga property, which Timurn is.
Do you remember their names?
Well, Dada Shivananda, the late Dada Shivananda, and Dada Sarvabodhananda, who we know very well. Yeah. And those were the two Avadhuts that he made in Timurn. Dada Sarvabodhananda had been Sarit Kumar before that, and I had known him in New York sector where he worked for years. In Rotterdam, on the surface of things, Rotterdam was not, one might think that Rotterdam would not be a nice place for spiritual experiences. The margiis had two rented houses right next to each other. There was passageways between the two places. It was crowded. The stairways going up and down were not 90 degrees, but they were really narrow and really steep. And there were so many margiis there. We were sleeping in the darshan room and anywhere we could find. And it was not, on the physical level, it was not an easy experience. Baba's room, a little bit of background, which I think is necessary. Baba was in a room on the ground floor. If you're facing the houses, Baba's room was on the right-hand house. There was a passageway of maybe 3 meters, more or less. Baba would go through that passageway to get to the darshan room in the other house. And the darshan room was always set up with a place for Baba to sit. And one night, things were so crowded and perhaps so noisy, I actually slept in that passageway. So I was just literally a couple of meters from Baba. And today I would be shocked to think that someone might do that. But I guess I was, of course, a lot younger then. And I just slept in that passageway almost next to Baba. And I hope I wasn't disturbing him by my being so close to where he was, although there was, of course, a door between us. But this leads to one story that happened there. I was, as I said, from Ekenrot on through the rest of the tour, I was doing VSS guard duty along with a number of other margiis. And one day I was taking up my duty. We usually had 2-hour shifts, I think, as VSS guard. And my duty was to be in front of Baba's door. not bad, but that was during the time when Baba was scheduled to give his darshan. Grumble, grumble, grumble in my mind, but I had to do it. It so happened that just before I took up the duty, there had been some incident. And when I went downstairs to stand in front of Baba's door, I and a few others, I think Didi Ananda Karuna was there, and two or three others, we heard Baba really yelling and shouting at Dada Ramananda for this breach of decorum, or whatever we might call it. And Baba was just shouting at him really loud and long and strong in Hindi. And I asked one of the margiis from India, what did Baba say? And he was just saying, shh, because he wanted to hear what Baba was saying. So he couldn't tell me what Baba was saying. But anyway, after a couple of minutes of him yelling and shouting at Ramananda really fiercely, it was quiet. And then a moment later, I heard Parampita Baba Ki, which means Baba had gone through that passageway a few steps, and he was giving darshan. And I was thinking, in my very naive, mundane way of thinking, I was thinking, I'm glad I'm doing BSS duty this time, because Baba was in such a bad mood. It probably won't be a very interesting darshan. Later that evening, I met a friend of mine, Jyotirupananda, also from the States. And without knowing anything that happened, because only a handful of us knew what had happened, that Baba was, so angry at Ramananda. Later, as I met Jyotirupananda, he said, oh, it was such a blissful darshan this time. And then my very small human mind realized that Baba can do anything. He can change his mood at a moment. In fact, Baba doesn't change his mood. He makes his mood according to the need of the situation. At that time, he needed to scold Ramananda, but a moment later, he needed to give the margiis some bliss. So his radical change of mood would be very difficult for anyone, any normal person. But for Baba, it's just like that. There's no problem changing his mood according to the situation. A couple of other incidents in Rotterdam, which were important to me. There was a margi from Switzerland named Bodhishwar. Perhaps you've heard about him. Perhaps you've interviewed him. I don't know. He was Baba's host in Switzerland, and he was in some of the places in Europe. So Baba in Switzerland, Baba was always paying a lot of attention to him. Where is Bodhishwar? And many times asking about Bodhishwar, asking for Bodhishwar. And so Bodhishwar obviously had a very close place in Baba's heart, at least on the surface. All of us have a close place of Baba's heart, of course. And one day, Bodhishwar and myself and Divyamurti, a margi from USA, who was living in Europe, we were doing Kaushiki and Tandava just before Baba's darshan that time. And it was a very narrow room and a lot of people. So after the darshan, after the Tandava, the margis swept us up. I was sitting on the right, Divyamurti in the middle, and Bodhishwar on the left. All three of us right next to Baba's dais. I could hardly reach up more than this. I could reach up just very simply and touch Baba, but of course you don't do that. We were right next to Baba, right in front of Baba, looking up at him. And, sometimes we get a thought in our mind or a fixation in our mind. Who knows where it comes from? So my fixation that time was, I want Baba to look at me. I was so close to Baba. And I guess I imagined if he looks at me at this distance, it'll be really great, rather than if he looks at me when I'm at the other end of the darshan room. So my whole fixation was, Baba, please look at me. We were leaning on our knees, the three of us, right next to each other. And we were in namaskar like this the whole time. And I'm looking at Baba, Baba, please look at me, mentally, of course. Baba, please look at me, please look at me. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Baba was looking this person, that person, here and there. And I guess a couple of times I saw him looking at Bodhishwar, who was just almost next to me with just one person between us. And so at one point I decided, after many minutes of the darshan, I decided, what's Bodhishwar doing that he can attract Baba's attention? I thought maybe he had some body language or something. So I'm looking at Baba. I look over at Bodhishwar, look back at Baba, the space of 2 or 3 seconds. And right when I look up at Baba, he's taking his eyes away from me. Grumble, grumble, grumble. The only time Baba looked at me was when I was looking at Bodhishwar. So I did realize that the message that I got from there is that when Baba's speaking, listen to Baba's words. Obviously, as we know, whatever Baba says is important. Nothing that Baba says is trivial. but I was fixated on Baba looking at me, and so I wasn't listening to Baba at all. And I guess that's the lesson I got from that darshan. Uh, and afterwards, I couldn't have told you one word that Baba said, because of course, it was a blessing that I could focus my attention on Baba, but I was missing his words, which is unfortunate. So, as I say, I was VSS guard throughout the tour, and here in Rotterdam, I went on a couple of the field walks with Baba as a VSS guard, not as part of his group. And one day, I was in a very negative mood. Rotterdam was raining, nothing much to do, very crowded in the Jagrati with so many people, and I was just in a negative mood the whole day long. No, no, no. But it was time for Baba's evening walk, so I was one of the guards. We piled into the various cars, went out to a park near the edge of Rotterdam, or just outside of Rotterdam, and we got out, and there were always 4 VSS guards, perhaps GV also sometimes, I'm sure. And that particular darshan, or that particular field walk, I was behind Baba on his right, and there was a guard on the other side and 2 in front leading Baba. And the distance, there were probably, I can't remember exactly, probably 8 or 10 people with Baba in his group, along with Baba's PA. And we were outside, and we could not get near Baba. We could not hear what Baba said. We were not supposed to pay attention. We were VSS guards to make sure everything went well. But that whole walk, it was, I guess, 30 or 40 minutes, the walk through this nice forest park. And the whole time, as I'm telling you, I was saying, no, 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 in my mind. Every thought that came to my mind, no, I'm not enjoying being here. No, I don't want to stay here. No, the weather's not nice. Everything I was thinking was no. At one point, maybe midway through the field walk, we were turning a corner, and I could see Baba directly. Normally, I couldn't see him so easily because of all the people with him. But as I saw Baba, I was thinking naively to myself, I was thinking, I hope Baba's not listening to my thoughts. And I kind of rationalized that Baba's so busy, he has no time for me. So we go through the walk, we finish the walk, and at the end of the field walk, we all line up one after another. Baba's at the end, and he's walking past us to get in his car. And I'm maybe halfway through this group of many people, 20 people or so, that Baba's walking past. And as Baba gets near me, not in front of me, as Baba gets near me, he looks at me and he says, "Is this a man-made park?" Or some common question like that. And I said, "Yes, Baba." And right when Baba gets in front of me, as you can see where my finger is in front of my face, right when Baba gets in front of me, he says quietly, he says, "Now the boy says yes." And he didn't look at me. He just said it in a very common way, just like you might say, "Oh, I wonder when the bus is coming," you know. But he said to me, he said, "Now the boy says yes." And then he walked past, and he got in his car, and we all rushed. Sorry?
Nonchalantly.
Nonchalantly, yeah, that's a good word, yeah. And so we all got in our cars and followed Baba's car back to the Jagrati. And it took me a couple of minutes to settle my mind, because we're rushing to get in our cars and making sure we're in the right position near Baba's car, because we're the VSS car. And then I realized, oh, something amazing just happened. And I had to realize that, yes, Baba is always paying attention to everything. His mind is not a very well-developed mind. His mind is the cosmic mind, the universal mind. So nothing is beyond his ability to understand. Going on with where Baba was, I went to Paris for a couple of days. Then we went on to Valencia, where Baba was. And you've probably heard the story about, we were in this monastery that some margiis had arranged. But that first night, Baba gave one darshan there. But that first night, Baba left because he realized he was disturbing some of the monks there, at least one monk. And he stayed in a small flat that one margii sister owned in Valencia itself. So every day we would commute from the monastery. It was okay for us margiis and acharyas to stay there, but we commuted every day into town to Baba's darshan, and it was a small flat. And the only thing I can really remember that was relevant there, that I still remember, was that at one point, Baba said that the Spanish margies could make a lot of money if they would grow sweet lemons from Israel. Now, that presuming we had a master unit. Now, this is many years later, but as far as I know, the margies still have not resourced the sweet lemons from Israel that Baba was talking about. And I know there has been some research by some people to find these sweet lemons from Israel, but somehow they haven't found it, and we certainly are not growing it in Spain. But I hope people don't forget that Baba said that, and in the future, maybe it'll make a difference for Ananda Marga in Spain. After Spain was Leon, and in Leon there was an important incident or story that I had. But the background to Leon was we had to rent a Jagrati there, but it was not in great shape, in a kind of bit of a poor area of town, I guess. So they rented a hotel room for Baba. But can you imagine that Baba would want to stay in a hotel room, especially when we have a Jagrati there? No. So we had to go through some frantic day, or less than a day, of fixing everything, making a nice room for Baba, installing a toilet in the publications room right next to Baba's room, the press room, I should say. I don't know how they installed the toilet so soon. I was commissioned to paint the handrails going up the stairs, because we were on the second or third floor, and they painted everything. They got everything in shape, and Baba came in. It was amazing to see how fast we could do the work that Baba wanted, so the Jagrati was presentable. But before that, Baba landed in the airport, and we all go to greet him. And the common thing was that Baba would then come out of the airline and sit for a while. They'd set up a chair for him in one corner of the airport area. And the thing is, then we would do some Kaushiki and Tandava. And I had done Tandava a number of times after Fieschi, because I was one of the very few people that toured the whole way around Europe with Baba. So the Acharyas got to know me pretty well. And here in here in France, finally, they had found some live snakes. So instead of using a dagger and a flame or whatever, we were using live snakes to do Tandava. And there was no brother from France there, oddly enough. So the Dadas, whoever Dada, he asked me if I would do Tandava in front of Baba. Doing Tandava alone in front of Baba with snakes, what could be better? What could be more stimulating for a young Margi brother? So they put this tilak on me, got this uniform that we wear, but then they had me put my clothes on, my normal clothes on top, because they didn't want to let the police know, or the security people know, that we were going to do something strange. And they kept the snakes in some cage or whatever. One Dada would have had them by his side, I guess. And it was only till the last minute that I would then take off my clothes, super Tandava, and do some Tandava in front of Baba. But at the last minute, one brother from France came there. So as I understood, I didn't want to understand, but as I understood, if there's a local Margi brother to do Tandava, Baba would not be happy for a foreigner from halfway around the world to be doing Tandava. So they arranged that he would do Tandava, and I was in a very down state. I was extremely, upset, not upset, but frustrated that I couldn't do Tandava in front of Baba. Although logically I understood that it has to be a local brother. That's perfectly logical. But I was in a certain state, and to describe the physical situation, Baba's sitting in a corner, I think maybe near some windows. Then there's some VSS guards and his PA very near him. Then there's margies around, and the PA, the VSS guards are there to make sure no one gets past them to get near Baba, because that's not nice. But I was in such a mood that I just walked past the PA, past the VSS guards, sat near Baba. There were some bhajans playing, Kiirtana, I guess, also, and no one stopped me. It was like no one saw me. Actually, I believe that Dada Ramananda did see me, but he had understood my mood, because he's a quite intuitive person. He was, and he let me sit there. And this brother started doing Tandava, and his arms were going up and down all over the place. His rhythm was not very good at all. It was not a good Tandava by the normal standards. But all the time there, Baba would look at the brother, then he'd look at me and smile, then look at the brother, and then he'd look back at me and smile. Baba, of course, understood what I wanted. And of course, it's a good thing to want to do kirtan or to do Kaushiki or Tandav in front of Baba. Why not? It's an honor. But Baba just smiled at me and nodded at me, and we both understood that this brother was doing his best, but it wasn't very good. And this reminds me also that sometimes in Europe, and I believe in India also, certainly sometimes the Tandava would not be very good, and Baba would say, when it wasn't very good, Baba would say, very good, very good. Even when it's not very good, it's very good. And it's hard to understand what Baba meant by that, but that was, Baba's way of expressing things. And I eventually got over my heartache, shall I say. I'm kind of talking tongue in cheek when I say that, but we went back to Lyon, and we had the program for 2 or 3 days. Then we all went to Verona, which was going to be the last stop of Baba. And I know we're not so interested here in the travel details, but I got to the train station with a number of other margiis, excited that we're going to now see Baba again for the last time before he leaves Europe. And we get to the train station, and I see margiis are standing around, acharyas are standing around, one Didi is sitting around crying. And I thought, something's wrong here. And of course, we found out that Baba had been denied entry into Italy. And as you may have heard, we later heard that Baba said it was someone higher than the government that denied Baba's visa, which can only mean the Pope in Italy. So that was the end of Baba's stay in Europe. We did the Italian margiis did some demonstrations with signs, and it was covered a lot in the local newspapers that our guru has been denied entry into our country. And they did, as I say, they got some news coverage, but we didn't get Baba. One or two other things about Europe. After this, I went up to Denmark, which is the global Proud office, and I was a Proud optee, so I stayed there for a couple of weeks. But one time, in the morning time, we went into Copenhagen, which was maybe a half an hour, 45-minute drive from the Jagrati. And I was with myself, Dada Ananda, and a few margiis, doing some business, some work that had to be done. And then on the way back, it was midday, and we were driving toward the Jagrati, and someone noticed a nice riverbank, a nice little park that we can go sit for meditation. And I was in a grumbly mood. I said, no, let's get back to the Jagrati. We can do sadhana at the Jagrati. That's where we want to be. And they, no. And so they all stopped, and they all rushed out of the car and went down toward the riverbank to do their noon meditation. And I was in one of my grumbly moods again, as I said. And so I finally got out of the car, got to do sadhana anyway. And I was in such a negative black mood because I wanted to go to the Jagrati. And I sat down to do my meditation. And before I could even do my shuddhis, my mind jumped up to heaven somewhere. And I couldn't even do my shuddhis. I couldn't even do my lessons. I was in such bliss. It was I was just in heaven. I can't describe the exact words that would have gone through my mind, but I was just in one moment, literally in one moment, I went from a black, negative, grumbly mood to just being in bliss. I've rarely been in a state like that, perhaps never. And it lasted for the whole time we did the meditation. Later, I described that to someone, and they said, probably that's just your result of being with Baba for a month in Europe. It came out at that moment, and it was just heavenly, that meditation. But it wasn't planned at all, as I said. I changed my mood 180 degrees in a moment, less than 5 seconds, I'd say. Yeah. So that was my experiences in Europe with Baba. But still, as I know you might ask how I became a WT.
How did you become a WT?
Oh, by the way, you're asking that. Well, first, I went back to Seattle, where I was living, a beautiful city, and I got a job because I'd been in LFT and I needed something else. But then after a couple of years, I was on my way to the sectorial conference in the central USA again, before we owned the master unit in Ananda Kanan. And I'd heard that Baba was doing some particular thing in India, in Calcutta, which we later understood was Dharma Samiksha. At that time, as Dada Dineshananda said in his interview with you, it was called 16 Points Check or something. And I went to the retreat, planning to go straight back to Seattle, where I'd been living for about 3 years. This was in the summer of 1981, and in the meantime, I'd heard a lot about this 16-point check, and so I said, "Why not go?" I had some money, and so I went to New York City. We went to India. My first time in India, and I saw the cows roaming the streets and the intense heat and the flies and the the strange roads, the dirt roads, and all that. And it was a strange experience. But we got to Calcutta, and I was signed up eventually for Dharma Samiksha. And Baba, there was usually a group of for the brothers. I think about 15 or 20 of us in a room at one time. One would come up. The Dada, probably Dada Vijayananda, would announce the brother's name. He would come up, do sastang pranam to Baba. With me, I think it was normal as with everyone else. Baba looked at me. I had raised my hands, and he gave me some caning on both sides of my ribs under my arms, which was painful, but it went away quickly. And Baba said just a few things to me. One thing I remember he said, "You should smile some more," because I guess being with Baba and being in the intense heat of India, I was not in a real cheerful mood. With Baba, I was in a happy mood, but it wasn't. It was a respectful, somber mood. So Baba just told me, he said, "You should smile some more," and a few other things, and I went on. And then I went to Ananda the next day. I'd never, of course, been there, and I got sicker than I've ever been in my life. For about 5 or 6 days, I couldn't even move. I was mainly unconscious most of the time. And finally, with the help of the Dadas there and margiis, I got some medicine, and I was better. And I went back to Calcutta. And here, kind of interesting thing happened. I was scheduled to go to France after that, and I was going to be going along with one margi sister named Kamala. She was from USA, and she'd become a margi in France. You may have met her. I think she lives in Australia now.
Yeah, I think I know.
And you may have met her, yeah. And so we were scheduled to take a plane the next day. I missed the flight. It was a morning flight because I was still sick from Ananda Nagar. I could walk, but I was not healthy at all. So I took an afternoon flight to Bombay, and we were going to take a morning flight from Bombay to Delhi to Paris. And I knew some margis in Paris, but I had no phone numbers, nothing, because I hadn't been there in a while. And I was counting on Kamala, who spoke French and knew the margis. But as I found out later, this Kamala got arrested by the police. She must have been quite a serious criminal for them to arrest her. Of course, I'm joking. She had simply been a margi, and they were arresting all the margis they could find. So I'm on a flight by myself, not knowing French, not knowing where to go in France, not knowing anything. And on the flight, we stopped, as I said, we started in Mumbai, went to Delhi, and then on to Paris. And partway through the flight, after the pickup in Delhi, I got up to go to the bathroom or something, and I noticed one person there I knew, and it was Guru Charan, a margi from France, who I'd known in France, in Fieschi. And he was actually a tour guide. He had not come for Dharma Samiksha. He was just bringing a group of French tourists back from India to Paris. And fortunately, I met him, and so I went to his house and recovered for a week with the great help of him and his family, who are extremely hospitable and helpful in my health. But then I went back to, after this Dharma Samiksha, I was inspired to get back into the Ananda Marga flow. So I became an LFT again, going to Mexico. And then I went to Washington, D.C., where I continued being an LFT. In Mexico, one thing about Ananda Marga is, as experienced margis and acharyas, we know that the things that happen are not necessarily for practical reasons. So I was in Mexico almost a year, and my output was slightly more than zero. But I realized later that my output was really, I was becoming stronger mentally, becoming more of a tantric personality because of the difficulties that I had to put up with in Mexico. And as I say, the output was very, very little on my part. In Washington, I was an LFT, and I was thinking, of course, what should I do? What should I do with my life? I was getting into my early 30s, and thinking of, 5 minutes, thinking of getting married, but that didn't work out. And at any point. And at one point, I had a meeting with one acharya, and I was asking what I should do, and he talked to me for an hour. I can't remember a word of what he said, but at the end of that meeting, I realized I'm going to be an acharya, and things just flowed from there. And eventually, I did go to training, of course. But one thing happened in the middle, which is good psychology. I was still not 100% sure if I should be a Dada or not. And I was talking with Dada Nietzsche Shuddhananda, a respected older Dada who I ended up knowing very well over the years. And he said to me, well, maybe you shouldn't be an acharya. And of course, that made me feel, why does he think I shouldn't be an acharya? What is he saying? And that just made it more clear to me that I should be an acharya. I eventually, of course, went to India, went to training in Varanasi, and after training, I had my second PC with Baba, which is near the end of what we need to say here. And in that PC, I can't remember a lot of it, but at one point, Baba asked me if I spoke French, and I could only say, no, I don't speak French. I said it in French, actually, which I don't know if Baba was happy about that. But then the interesting thing was Baba was telling me that he said, your forefathers' mother tongue is Sudeten German. And then Baba described that there's 4 types of German, and I can't remember what he said, low German, high German, whatever he said. And he said Sudeten German is a combination of Polish and German. But with Baba's accent, I thought Baba said that Sudeten German is police German. And I thought, oh, the police have their own type of German? And then eventually I realized that Baba was saying that Sudeten German, my forefathers' language, is a combination of Polish and German. And after that, Baba said some more things, but I left and eventually got my first posting. And here I am many years later, talking
and so
to
what are you doing now?
Acharya Narada Muni. What am I doing now? Yeah. One of the good things I've been doing is doing sadvipra training with margiis. Myself and one margi who lives in northern England, he's a psychologist, and we've developed a course of sadvipra workshops. And we've only had one so far, I confess, but it went quite well, and we need to follow up with other sadvipra training, and for margiis, and eventually for others. And traveling around a bit in Paris, a bit in Brussels. And also looking for a publisher for another book. I have one book you may know on meditation, but now I recently wrote a book basically on reincarnation, past lives, future lives, afterlife, samskara, of course, dealing with these topics. And I'm looking for a publisher. I do get good feedback from the people who read it, but I need to find that publisher. And then, I'll be up there with J.K. Rowling as far as being a famous writer. And my book will be sold everywhere. Yeah. You doubt it?
No doubt it'll be a bestseller.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. But I'm looking for a publisher for that. And that's the main thing, just doing regular things in England, prachar around the country. And as I say, the sadvipra workshops are the important thing I feel I'm doing right now, because that's the future, and we need to make the future now. Yeah.
Yes, we need more sadvipras too.
We do. We need a lot of sadvipras. The question that comes up in our workshops is always, have there been any sadvipras in the world? And people come up with names like Nelson Mandela, and a few other names come up regularly. But it's hard to say if there's ever really been any sadvipras yet on this planet. There have been mahasadvipras, we know. Shiva, Krishna, Baba, perhaps Buddha. Perhaps some others, perhaps Jesus Christ, and perhaps others, but we've never come to any conclusion about that. But whether there have been or not, it's our duty to develop sadvipras. Yeah,
it is.
So that's that. Yeah.
That's a good note to finish on, Dadaji. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Namaskar.
Okay. Namaskar.